Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of College Journey Conversations here at Capstone Educational Consultants. We're super excited to have our special guest, Brooke Daly, with us from Advantage College Planning in North Carolina. Raleigh's a great place, and we want to welcome you, Brooke. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Yes, thank you, Mark, for having me. This is fun.
Yeah, well, we go way back because some of our viewers may not know this, but we've actually had the opportunity to present many subject matters at both of the conferences, the Higher Education Consultants Association, HECA, and we've also presented at IECA, the Independent Educational Consultants Association. And so it's always a trip to be able to get in front of people and just be ourselves and share some good content with fellow consultants. Yeah.
Yes, I'm excited. Like I told you earlier, this is as close as we're going to get to the Mark and Brooke show.
That is right. We've always talked about how it'd be kind of cool to have our own little show, right? That's so elementary.
Here we are.
I feel like we're back in junior high just for that purpose. But it's so super glad and so super exciting to have you here. Today, we're going to be tackling a really interesting subject matter, right? Because so much has been going on in the world of college admissions. And there's a lot going on in the world, but college admissions is something that has definitely gone through quite a transformation over the course of the last 6 months. And we want to talk a little bit about what actually is changing in the environment of college admissions. When you think about the admissions office, which I spent 10 years as the director of admissions and enrollment management at one time, and so when I think of college admissions, it's real to me. It's definitely something that I think about in depth, and it makes sense to me with some of the decisions that are made along the course of a college's journey as a college, but also some of the decisions they make as well for students. So it kind of makes sense to me. But over the last 6 months, there's been some changes that are really kind of eyebrow raisers, right? There's been a few things that have happened with regards to the Department of Justice that late last year, and that has definitely caused a few changes to take place with regards to their investigation with how NACAC, a governing organization, really spent time with their code of ethics and their professional practices to make decisions on how they handled the admissions office, right? What are your thoughts on that whole transition?
Yes. So I think one of the biggest things that came out of that was the college's ability to, I guess, quote unquote, poach students, even after the May 1 deadline. So before the coronavirus happened, that was one of the things that I had thrown out, even to my team, is to say, how is this going to affect student decisions? What's going to happen after May 1st, after our seniors deposit? Is that going to be an issue? Are they going to be, courted by other colleges with more scholarship money, or better housing, premier parking space? You didn't know what was going to happen. And now thinking back on that, it seems like a lifetime ago, because now the landscape has changed in a different way. However, I do still think that after May 1st, of course, we're into June, I think that we will see colleges who are not meeting enrollment numbers trying to entice students. So I think it's yet to be seen exactly what that looks like. And it's the unknown, right? I feel like in a lot of what we're going to talk about, it's like, well, this is what we think, this is what we predict, this is what we're hearing, but a lot of it still is the unknown.
Yeah, there's still many question marks out there as to kind of really where this is going to land. I always look at it kind of like this big hot air balloon, right? And it's trying to land in a field, but we really can't predict its exact location. And so this is very similar, and there are many things, many moving parts, and even among the parts, there are so many unknowns. And so it's just really hard to predict. By no means are we going to try to predict these things, but I think there's some some valid evidence to suggest that there's some significant changes. And while I'd like to spend a lot of time talking about students, students are in the forefront of what you do, in the forefront of what I do. I want to spend a little bit of time about what we can anticipate coming out of the admissions office. Like, what are some of those changes that we see happening at admissions? And I'd love to rewind the tape of time back to pre-COVID, because I think a lot of things that we might actually see changing before our eyes are not even COVID related, which is kind of bizarre given the fact that we've identified or we are starting to see and experiencing a lot of COVID related changes, right? So some of those that are going to be changing are coming directly out of that NACAC, that DOJ experience, that whole situation. So let's talk about several things that once were, but now because of DOJ and NACAC's code of ethics and professional practices changes, we are now going to see something different. So let's talk about those specifically. One of them is incentives, right? What do we mean by incentives? What does that look like? Let's talk about that a little bit.
So incentives, so that's, I think, what I had just mentioned with, it could be a larger scholarship. So you've already submitted a deposit to another school, but then, X school says, hey, we really want you, and we'll offer you $5,000 more in scholarship per year if you want to come here. That could be, like I said, priority housing, parking spaces, who knows what that will look like. But I think the important thing is the timing of after May 1. That is something that didn't happen in the past that was going to, I think, happen regardless of whether or not COVID-19 hit. Is there anything I'm missing, Mark? Anything that you're seeing?
No, I really think, it's important that before this DOJ decision that took place, before that, colleges could not offer incentives. And I think this is the point of this session, is to talk about those things that have changed. So before November, if you will, of 19, colleges could not offer an incentive. So they couldn't say, look, you come to our school, we'll give you your favorite parking spot, or we'll give you a window view, or we'll give you extra additional money, or priority this or priority that. They could not offer those incentives. Now they can. Now remember, and I think it's important for our viewers to hear and to remember that this is nothing to do with COVID, nothing to do with it. This is pre-COVID changes. And so we can see now these really potentially unusual incentives taking place. Is somewhat and could be, I think, somewhat amplified by COVID. Like, I think COVID could actually now open, the door and the window for incentives, so to speak.
Right.
And I think colleges could get very creative.
And I think what we are going to see, I feel like it's going to be blurred lines. We're not going to know now what the real impact of the DOJ decision is or was because of COVID-19, because you can't anticipate, or you can't delineate, I guess, what's one and what's the other.
So before we had the chance to kind of observe the implications, the impact, the effect of these decisions, COVID came on the scene.
Right.
And so that will kind of muddy the water significantly. So we may not see what this effect might be for another year, maybe more. But incentives are kind of an interesting perspective, especially when it comes to colleges recruiting and students deciding. It's definitely going to put a spin on things, and a spin not necessarily in the favor of a student, because it increases the level of anxiety, it extends the length of time of decision, There's a lot of implications there that are not necessarily positive, although it feels somewhat positive because, closer parking spot,
Yeah. Well, I will say in North Carolina, and I would guess that there are similarities in other states. Of course, a lot of our students are deciding to stay closer to home.
Right.
So therefore, a lot of our students are saying, well, I got into UNC Chapel Hill, which usually happens anyway. They're deciding to stay closer to home.
Yeah.
Now, even I think with incentives, I don't think you'd be able to talk those students into going somewhere else when they can get a UNC Chapel Hill education for $22,000 or $23,000 per year. So, I have some very high achieving students who were accepted into some really selective schools with already some great, scholarships, and it didn't matter. This particular student I have in mind is going to NC State because he's going engineering. So that just naturally was, a good decision for him and his family at this point.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about this here in just a minute as it relates to COVID specifically. But your mention of wanting to stay closer at home, or closer to home, to attend college closer to home, kind of makes a big difference. But with incentives, in a normal year, whatever normal looks like, but definitely normal non-COVID, without COVID being present. An incentive could pull that student who would normally stay nearby away from home at a potentially less amount of money for college, or with a better parking spot. We keep referring back to that parking spot, but as an example of a great incentive.
You do know High Point University is in my backyard, so
yeah, that's true. But everybody has a great parking spot there, right?
That's so true.
So true. All right. So definitely we have the implication of incentives as one of those things that changed as a result of decisions made pre-COVID. Another is the effort of recruitment, right? That looks a lot different. We're hoping to see a deposit come in at in May 1st, which is what was before the deadline, the absolute kind of decision day that we called it, where students were to actually deposit. And now that is kind of a muddy date, right? We kind of see it extend a little bit to June this year, but now what happens?
Right. So now, of course, May 1 is sort of the deadline. Some colleges have bumped it out to June 1 this year, just for this admission season, so that students who, for whatever reason, needed more time to make a decision had that time. And so now colleges, though, can, as we talked about, can poach students. So that's going to be, that will be a big change, I think, in the admission process. And then one of the things that you brought up that I haven't looked into, I think, as much as you have, is the, convincing previous applicants, to transfer. So do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, like when you're talking about a previous applicant to transfer, that opens up an opportunity for colleges to begin to reach in the bucket of another college, so to speak, and begin to, you've used the word poach, which is, that's a great word, and it definitely demonstrates what potentially happens. I like to think of it maybe as like a nab, like a student's been nabbed by another one to come over. I love the word nabbed. I'm always looking for a good word to use. But colleges are able to kind of poach or nab another student from another institution, and they're no longer pre-COVID. They couldn't touch them. Pre-COVID, they couldn't recruit them. Pre-COVID, they couldn't reach out and suggest, even after they've made a decision for another college, they couldn't mess with them anymore. They're hands off. May 1st deadline deposit allowed them to hands off. But now they're free game. And so the literature won't stop right, that you get in the mail. The phone calls may not stop that you might receive to be recruited. And when you've made a decision to go to University A, College B may actually give you a call 3 days before it's time to move. And that's going to kind of stink, right?
Yeah.
Not just for the student, but it's going to be difficult in the admissions office to kind of manage those numbers and manage their yield, because if you think of an institution who has a low matriculation rate for their incoming class, and they need to add bodies to their count, that recruitment is going to go strong. So their recruitment cycle doesn't end. It continues right up to the day of drop ad. We always called it. And that's well into the semester. We have a lot. First of all, I want to just kind of say hello to everyone who's watching and listening to us right now. We're super excited that you've joined us. I'm a little overwhelmed by the names I see kind of coming in, and I'm pretty excited about it. So if I'm stumbling in my words, I apologize for that.
I'm glad I don't know, Mark.
I know, I'm super excited. Thank you, Stefano, for like telling us what a mess this is. I'm hoping you're talking about the topic and not us. So we're pretty excited about that. Sean, thanks for just kind of giving us a shout out, and it's our pleasure to be able to host it. So we're excited to be here. Thank you. If anybody has any questions, feel free to post them. We'll definitely get to them. And just for the record, Brooke is the one with all the answers. So I will feed the question to Brooke, and Brooke will be able to answer the question. But yeah, so we've got some interesting changes that are taking place. The implications are rather enormous as it relates both to the student in the decision making and as it relates to the admissions office. And there's just a lot happening. So we've got incentives that are now on the table. We've got ongoing recruitment that is on the table now. And the last one, I think, as you've mentioned, is to convince previous applicants or previous prospects to transfer to their school unless the student first inquires about transferring. So those three things are going to be rather significant. Anything that you want to add there, Brooke, to that?
No, I don't think so, Mark.
Awesome, I love it. You're like right in there. So there's a few things that I think that are noteworthy. One thing is, as it relates to that May 1st deadline, of course, that's the deposit deadline, right? And all institutions typically have a deposit, but we might see, as a result of these changes, we may actually witness one of two things: either the elimination or waive of a deposit in order to get someone in the coffer, so to speak, for admissions, more or less. And we might actually see an increase of the deposit fee in order to secure a particular student. So where we might see now an enrollment deposit of $100, $250, do you, Brooke, think that it would be unfeasible to see in the near future a deposit of $1,000, maybe at $1,500?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, Mark. And I will say this is complete speculation on my part, but I think as a business, it would make sense for the colleges to increase their deposit so that they do secure these students and that they're less likely to give up their deposit to go somewhere else. I mean, that just makes sense. However, when you're talking about scholarship money, if as you say, University A says, we'll offer you $5,000 more per year in scholarship money than College B, parents, are smart consumers. They will say, well, that $1,000 deposit we just paid, we're going to get that back and then some. So I don't know if that's necessarily, if that would act as a deterrent for students to not end up transferring. However, I mean, maybe the colleges feel like if they want to know, obviously, their enrollment numbers. And if that increases their likelihood of knowing what that's going to be with a little bit more security, then I wouldn't blame them for doing it.
Right, right.
Mhm.
Yeah, I agree. It'll be interesting to see where colleges choose to take their enrollment deposits. Typically, in years past, the enrollment deposit was a security,
Mhm.
and it informed the admissions office of a particular yield that was expected.
Mhm.
And over the course of time, they could accurately predict how many beds would be filled, so to speak, as a result. Now that deposit is really muddy and kind of loose, like there's no security in it. And so that could potentially be problematic for upcoming admissions cycles.
Yeah, I feel for my colleagues on the admission side.
Oh, when all of this went down, I was like, man, this is not a good. Definitely, it used to be a good educated guess, if you would, in terms of how many students to actually expect for the incoming class. Now it's an educated guess with a blindfold and no dartboard. So it's going to be definitely challenging. We do have a question that's like on the table now. And so here's a question from one of our viewers that says, have you seen more students than normal double or triple deposit? So now that's an interesting question by one of our viewers. And thank you so much for posting that, because what happens there? Are you seeing that? Are you seeing double and triple deposits?
I mean, with my own students, I'm not, because I'm educating them on the pitfalls of that decision. However, I will say more of the families I'm working with this year than ever have asked about doing that because they feel so uncertain. They don't know. And so I think it's natural for those families to feel like, we don't want to put all of our eggs in one basket. Like, we would like him to go out of state, but we don't know what the fall is going to look like. And we certainly don't want to pay, $60,000 a year for an online education. So can we deposit there and deposit at NC State,
So tell me, Brooke, what are some reasons why, and this would circle back around to you're educating your students, the implications of doing that, the bad implications of doing that. So what is it that you share with them, or how do you educate them on a single deposit and the importance of that?
Yes. So I mean, of course, I talk about the ethics of that and the colleges not knowing their real enrollment numbers. And for schools that are more selective, there's a wait list. So you're taking one of those spots from a student who may be waiting for that spot. So, we talk about like I said, the ethics of it. And, I talk about sending a final transcript. Are you going to have your high school counselor send 3 final transcripts to these schools? I don't know if they would be willing to do that. So yeah, that is the essence of what we're sharing.
Yeah, I mean, we could definitely spend, I think, another half hour on the school-based counselors and their roles in all of these decisions too, because there's an expectation on them now that has more than doubled in terms of having to get the number of transcripts out, and when, because now, since the recruiting time has stretched through the summer, school-based counselors are typically on vacation during that time, and that's hard. That's going to be very hard on them. We do have another question, and this one's a little detailed. Thank you again for posting it. The question is, are there any advantages of the current state of affairs for low-income or first-gen middle-class students who qualify for need-based aid? Any advantages in this process, these changes for these categories of students?
Yeah, so I think that the need-based financial aid process is not necessarily changing. I think we're going to see more of those families who are going to be applying for financial aid. What I would say is, and again, it's unknown, is maybe some of the more selective schools will be, well, and I guess that's more related to the admission process versus the financial aid process. What I would say to a family like that, though, is, cast a decent size net and apply to a good range of schools so that you can compare financial aid offers and see who's going to be most generous. We could spend hours talking about the need-based financial aid process.
Yeah.
However, I think that that would be my one, I guess takeaway from that is make sure that you're applying to a good number of schools so that you can compare financial aid awards before you make a final decision. Because I think you're going to see that, whilst I don't think a lot of our, at least here in North Carolina, our public schools, I don't think those financial aid offers you're going to see a huge variance from year to year, from this year to next year. But private schools certainly, they may be more generous with a needy, a student who qualifies for need-based aid, maybe more so than they were in past years because they need to fill their spots. So.
Yeah, and I think there might be some room for colleges and universities to adjust the percentage that they have typically provided need-based to those that have need-based aid. I think that scale may shift for some to make it more affordable, to make their institution more affordable. So where a college may have, for an example, a 60%, we meet 60% of need. They may slide that to a 70 or an 80% need to narrow that gap just a little bit more, to make it more affordable under the circumstances, because they are going to have to make that window open a little higher for these students under the circumstances. There's just, as we mentioned at the very beginning, there's just so many moving parts, and all of them have to be kind of moving smoothly and willing to move to make it happen for students. So.
One thing sort of related to that that we had talked about is the financial health of colleges themselves. And it does, I think, coincide with need-based financial aid packages, because my concern and, something that, we're working on as a team in my office is assessing the financial health of especially the smaller private schools. So my fear is that some of those smaller private schools who are already discounting or offering lots of scholarship money to students, they're going to offer even more to try and get those students there. But will they be open in 5 years or 8 years? That's the big question mark. And I think, especially in our industry, I think it's important for us to be fully aware of that and to be keeping an eye on that, so we're making good recommendations to our students as far as their college list is concerned.
Absolutely. And I think that's a good point, because colleges, those private colleges are the ones that, especially the smaller ones, are at high risk, especially given the fact that their major source of revenue for their budgets, to meet their budgets, are coming from students from out of state, full pay. These guys are really helping fund this, and especially those from the alumni. All of this is kind of feeding these private schools. And now we've seen over the course of the last 6 months, these huge refunds that have eaten into what, at least for this single year, has been their life and blood.
Exactly. So
we're seeing layoffs. We're seeing, one thing that I had read about today, in fact, is not only is it impacting the faculty and staff at these institutions, but there's a whole nother category that lost their jobs that no one's ever mentioned. And that's the student workers. Like, the student workers had to go home. These guys were making money too, and these guys were working hard, and most of them were making money to fund their education. And that's all of the work study program, all of that halted as well. And so that significantly impacted them. So here's another question. We've got one on the line. So when families ask if their kids should take a gap year next year, what are you saying these days? Well, I've actually got an answer for you, Sean. Thank you for asking the question, but I'm gonna take you back to our website at capstoneed.com. And I want you to go to our College Journey Conversations tab. And one of our College Journey Conversations last week actually covered gap year experiences. So there's a whole session just like this one. This one's better because Brooke's with us. But last week we talked about gap year, and I'd encourage you or anyone else interested in gap years and learning more about gap year experiences and what that looks like and means, especially in the light of COVID. We cover that topic directly there. So I encourage you to go there. So these colleges are at risk. They're at risk of having to close their doors, lay workers off, and they're worried about getting students this fall and next fall. Mm-hmm. So that's a significant thing. I was online with on a video chat with a Georgia private university a week or so ago, and they were actually sharing the fact that they're going to be giving priority admission or consideration for admission to students who apply within 3.5 hours of their campus. That's a huge shift for this particular university. I'm not going to mention the name, but this is a huge shift for this university, and definitely a strategy that they're keeping in mind, because their rationale was we want students to be able to get home soon if they need to, and we don't want them to have to worry about getting on a plane to do that. Given that, they're also thinking about business. Right, as an institution, they're thinking about business. So because each student that they have is adding to their revenue stream to fund their institution. So that makes complete sense. Then comes COVID, right? All this that we've talked about, which Brooke is very interesting to me, all of this, I'm sorry, Sean, just to clarify, 3.5 hours from what? He's asking the question, and that would be 3.5 hours driving distance from their campus. So they've kind of drawn a circle around their campus, and if a student applied to their institution that fell within that radius, then they're going to spend a little bit more time for consideration and admissions there. But all that we've been talking about, Brooke, is about pre-COVID. We haven't even talked about the implications of COVID yet, which is pretty fascinating to me. But now we have all of this, the COVID reaction. And there's quite a few things that are on the docket for us there that are changing. One of the biggest, I think, is test optional.
Yep.
How big is this topic in North Carolina for you?
You know what? It's big. I think I get asked, of course, all the time about, college lists and are these schools test optional, from students who really, it shouldn't matter because they have strong test scores. Right. So I think that everyone is talking about it, but the conversation that we're having in our office is that, especially for those students who have strong test scores, that test optional does not mean test blind. And it's important to remember that, because not only for the admission process, but for merit scholarships, a lot of colleges have a very clear mark, GPA, SAT score, and you get X amount of dollars. So we want to make sure that students are not missing opportunities because they're just deciding, well, I don't have to submit them, so I won't. We want to make sure that they know the implications of giving up on testing or not continuing to test. So while yes, a lot of colleges are going test optional, and I do think it is fantastic, especially for the underserved populations who, they can't make that happen, or it levels the playing field in some cases for students. I think it's a good thing, but for a lot of our students, we're telling them not so fast. Like, let's make sure we talk through this.
Right. Yeah. And not to take the test optional option for granted. It's super important to recognize the fact that option is just what it says, optional. Schools are still, colleges and universities are still taking it who have declared test optional. They're just making it a little easier for those who have not had access to the ability to take one or two of those tests, the ACT or the SAT. Everybody knows we've had several cancellations on those administrations, and it's kind of pushing it back into kind of the panic zone of testing for our rising seniors. And I'm kind of consulting with my students to kind of share with them, look, you're not going to get penalized for things that are outside of your control. And that's super important for students to understand, because with this notion of, I've got to take this test, when can I sign up? Oh my gosh, it's canceled again. And retreating in despair over that, to recognize the fact that you are only responsible for that which you can control. And these tests, newsflash, you're not in control of these, right? So if you show up without your driver's license to a testing center on test day, that's a problem. That's in your control. But the fact that it got canceled, that's not in your control. So I'm telling my students, relax, take a deep breath. We're going to get through this, and be responsible to register. If you have that opportunity, relax during registration. It may take a little longer to do it, right? Everything takes a little longer. It takes a little longer to get groceries at the grocery store now, because the lines are longer and the distance between each person is longer. So it's crazy. So test optional is something that has changed because of COVID. In fact, I looked at the numbers today, and it's 1,200 plus colleges and universities nationwide are declaring test optional for 2021. So that's a lot. That's a lot. The list was like a 2-pager, a year and a half ago. So it suddenly is taking a whole ream of paper now to print out all of those colleges. So that's kind of good. Another change that's real big for us is that we're going to have more time, right? More time to make the decision. What are your thoughts on that? What are you talking to your students about, the time they have to do these different admissions things?
Yeah. So I guess, are you, just to be clear, are we talking about the class of 2021?
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, we are, because 2020 is like a month and a half away, right? 2 months away from hopefully showing up on the doorsteps of institutions. Some of them are going to show up at the online portal of their institution, which is going to look a little different, because there's just a mixed bag of what schools are going to be in, right? But I'm thinking in terms of the actual admissions process. Students are going to have more time, and admissions offices are going to have more time, right?
Exactly. Excuse me, Mom.
You got it. You got some, cue the music.
Yes, thank you.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, it's all good. So more time, yes. So one of the things that we did, and we were very cautious about it in our office, I think it was probably in April, we started doing online essay workshops for our juniors, knowing that, well, and it may have been early April. I mean, we jumped on the opportunity, but we were very clear with our students, listen, we're not pushing you to do this. But if you want to start even drafting something or writing can be very therapeutic. So during that really stressful time, we thought, well, this might be a good opportunity for students to do some self-reflection. So we jumped on that and helped our students in small groups, over Zoom in some essay workshops. So that, of course, has set our students up. So our students now are further ahead in the admission process than they ever have been. I mean, most of our students have completed most sections of the data entry portions of the Common App. A lot of them are done their activities list. A lot of them have worked on multiple drafts of their main college essay, and it's June 10th. I mean, that,
Right.
so yes, so more time for sure in this process. But I think, when I think about it, I mean, I think it's a good thing that we, worked with our students to get there. But we keep coming back to that their emotional and mental health is the priority. And that's what's important right now.
Right.
Above all, like we'll talk about college when you're ready to, or the applications. And so, of course, some of our students have taken that, like, I'm just not ready. Like, I just, I'm doing my thing. I'm spacing out for a while, and we respect that too. So we're not trying to push students, but there is, more time to write the essays, to fill out the applications.
Yeah. And I'm thinking too, as it comes down to decision day is kind of this really gray area that starts anywhere from May 1 and goes all the way through August ? Whenever the school starts. And so that gray area of decision is literally, it's been extended. So you have more time to decide. And I think in some ways that's a good thing. In some ways it's a good thing. It takes a little bit of the pressure off for students in that decision making who are having a hard time making a decision.
Right.
We're always encouraging students to get on campus, learn more about the institution. Now, granted, COVID has shut the doors of campus visits, although we're starting to see some of them kind of open up and provide that on-campus experience in a limited fashion. And that's good, that's good. So reach out to those schools, consider still adding them, even if it were a drive-by, to learn more about, so you can make a better decision. And even though you have more time, you might even have more time now to actually get a campus visit in.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. We're hoping so. I've, just this morning I was meeting with families of juniors, and they're wondering, are we going to, or they're rising seniors, do you think we're going to be able to get on campus? Like, well, I don't know.
Right. We were online with Mercer University this morning, and of course they've closed down all of their residence halls for any of their campus tours. So they won't be showing residence halls, but they're doing some limited on-campus tours. And so that's an example of some of those that are opening up their doors. You mentioned earlier in our conversation that we can anticipate likely larger scholarships. What do you think about that specifically? How do you see that kind of playing out?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, again, it will be for some of the colleges a buyer's market from the student's perspective. So I think that, kind of your mid-range selectivity is going to be, I think students will have more options. I think that they will be courted with more scholarships because those schools are going to be, trying to fill their seats. So naturally, I think you're going to see more competition and maybe more flexibility. And again, that's just speculation on my part. I don't have anything to back that up, just the nature of what's happening and, colleges having that need. I don't think that the most selective schools are going to necessarily be less selective in the admissions process, but I do think that those, kind of medium tier selectivity schools will be offering more merit scholarships to try and entice students. That's like I said, a prediction on my part.
Yeah, I mean, because we're looking at financial circumstances in the household that have been impacted. So finances can have a drastic effect on which college you end up attending, based on what that financial aid package looks like.
Right.
So I
just
know that
my comment was strictly merit.
Correct.
Need yes, I
Correct.
agree with that.
And I also feel like financial aid offices are likely going to get a lot more attention with regards to changes to financial circumstances in the household that could impact need as well. We've got an example, we've got a question here. Can you give an example of what you mean by mid-range selectivity? That's
Yeah.
on you.
Without naming names.
Yes, without naming names.
Yeah. So I would say, what would you consider, Mark? Maybe like the colleges who accept like 25 to 50% of applicants. Is that fair?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that would be a fair range. Yeah.
I think that would be the range that I would put out there.
Yep. Hopefully that helps answer that question just a little bit in terms of selectivity, mid-range.
Collegedata.com, it has great resources. You can find that statistic if you need it.
Yes, that's good stuff. What do you think about longer wait lists? Like, we've seen some pretty crazy things happening right now with students for the class of 2020 and the recruiting class of 2020 coming off of wait lists. Like, some of those are like eye-opening, and we are saying, oh my gosh, my student came off the list, or all of that. So what do you think about longer wait lists as a result of COVID?
Yes, I'm sure. I mean, if I was in enrollment management, I probably would have a long wait list too, so that I have students to pull from, because who knows how many students it's going to take before they get a student to fill a spot. So I think absolutely you're going to see longer wait lists. And that's, I guess, part of the reason why I predict that mid-range selectivity school is going to possibly be offering more scholarship money, because that's who I saw getting off of those wait lists are the students who wouldn't have gotten into those kind of mid-tier range, and they did. So I guess my prediction is that next year we'll see more of that, and maybe even in the admission process and not, or, in the wait list process. So, but yes, I think that wait list will continue to be long.
Yeah, and I think it's important for students to recognize that a wait list is not a bad thing in this case, especially. It, in fact, could be a very good thing to, even though it's not an absolute, yeah, you're in, congratulations.
Right.
It's more like, just kind of hang on, wait a minute. We've got to kind of work through some things before we can make a full decision. And that list being long gives better opportunity to be admitted. And I think that's good news for students, actually. We mentioned earlier about some last minute game changers. I am anxious to kind of witness this moment. I'm not excited about it. I'm like, it's going to be a little kind of unusual, because we're not used to seeing it. Obviously, students definitely are not used to seeing it. But what do you think about that last minute game changer experience?
Yeah. So by last minute game changer, I'm assuming we're talking about an offer from another school at the 11th hour.
Yeah. I mean, here we are, we're running up to the final, hour, and we've kind of set in our heart, packed our bags, got the pennant, bumper stickers on the car already, and we're ready to head out. And we get a phone call from University B that says, hey, we'll make it worth your while.
Yes, I think we're going to see that. And it's interesting. I actually had a student last year who's now a freshman in college, and she was on many wait lists, many. She was stellar student, wow. Great GPA, great scores. Extracurriculars were kind of so she didn't have a lot there. And so she was on many wait lists, and throughout the summer, she was getting offers off of the wait list. And finally, after the third school that she wanted to deposit to, her mom was like, I'm not buying another sweatshirt. Like, I have the sweatshirts with all of these colleges' names, and you're not going. Like, at what point? And literally that last call was, I think, like 2 days before she was supposed to show up at the other school, wow. Which was interesting. Yeah. This was the last admission cycle, not this one. So I have a feeling that, again, the financial pressure of these colleges, there will be many who are going to have to do something to try and fill their seats. I think that the pressure will be tremendous for the colleges. So yes, who knows what it will look like, but I think that we will see a lot of that.
Yeah, the game changer is definitely an interesting factor. It's going to happen more so like for your student, a plenty, and then some, it may not happen at all.
Mhm.
It really depends on how many colleges you're applying to, how marketable you are, if you will, to those institutions. And it's going to be an interesting journey. Definitely that game changer moment. Uh, Never before in the history of college admissions will July look like it's going to look. Like July was a quiet, let's go to the beach, take a deep breath because the recruitment cycle is getting ready to start up again. And July is not like that anymore. This year, July is going to look a little different as we're kind of weaning ourselves back off of COVID experiences, but it's definitely going to be an interesting month going forward, most definitely. So, what are some things that we know for a fact are not going to change? We've been talking a lot about the changes, and I'm super excited about the fact that this list is small. This is a short list. So this is great, maybe in some regard, but this is a short list. But what are some things that are not going to be changing?
Yeah, well, I think one of them that we've talked about is the May 1 deadline. I think we're still going to have it, but as we've talked about tonight, it's so, how much does it really mean when colleges can
Right.
recruit after May 1? So it's less meaningful than it once was, but I think we're going to continue to see that. Although I don't know what's going to happen next year, for the class of 2021. Will they have until June 1st? Because again, they didn't have enough time to visit because of everything happening. I think it's yet to be seen. We've talked about early decision remaining binding. I don't think that will change.
No, no,
So
that'll stay pretty firm, I think.
I think so. And I think, the other thing that we've talked about with deposits, I think deposits will become hopefully more meaningful, or, maybe colleges will come up with a different strategy for deposits, but I don't think that families will be able to get them back. So I think they will remain non-refundable.
Right. Yeah, and that's the short list of things that we can anticipate not changing, which isn't really it's really not glamorous by any means. It's a rather dull list of things, but we've got far more things changing in the year and months to come. And I think that we're going to get through it, but it's just going to be an interesting drive, that's for sure.
For sure.
Brooke, it is so good to have you on College Journey Conversations with Capstone Educational Consultants. We're pretty excited to have you. We're super excited to have everybody who has come in and unfortunately left for some reason, but many of you have stuck with us and we thank you for it. Thank you for all the questions that were lined up tonight. We're super excited. Without you, we wouldn't have been able to answer many of them. So we're pretty excited to have it. We are going to sign off for the evening, and we thank you all for joining us. Come visit us next week. We'll be right here at 7 o'clock again. We'll see y'all. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.